Hello, I'm Eric Segal, a member of the Socialist Party in Kent and also a member of Unite the Union. The pandemic has, over the past year, caused more than 2 million deaths and ushered in economic and social havoc worldwide. The World Bank predicts that the total gross domestic product will have shrunk by 5.2% in 2020, and that is the largest global economic contraction since 1945. Developing countries face a huge debt tsunami, and UNICEF have warned that the number of extremely poor people in those countries will increase by a staggering 420 million people. Extremely poor is defined as a condition characterized by severe deprivation of basic human needs: food, safe drinking water, sanitation, health, shelter, education and information. COVID-19, in fact, has exposed the deep inability of capitalism to take society forward, despite the huge technological and scientific leaps forward, such as the advances in artificial intelligence, that could be used to resolve poverty, famine, climate change and disease. But where new technologies are developed, they are used and they cause unemployment, underemployment, or 0-hour low-paid jobs rather than job creation and shorter working hours. Capitalism is showing us, in effect, that it's a barrier to human progress. 10 of the richest people in the world have increased their wealth by more than £300 billion since the start of the pandemic, and chief executives across Britain's 100 biggest stock market listed companies collect an obscene 73 times the average wage of their workers. But it's a different world for the majority in this country, with 5.6 million people, an increase of some 3 million over the recent period, receiving universal credit by the middle of the year, with little or insufficient work. An estimated 2 million families have been left destitute, that is, struggling to feed, house or clothe themselves, and more than 2 million people are on furlough, effectively taking a 20% wage cut, and are struggling to make their ends meet. But the bosses will try to get the working class and the poor pay for the price of the pandemic. How are we supposed to live under these conditions? The UK debt is now at its highest level outside of wartime, and so the government will try to use the state debt to justify a tax on the working class and poor. A new public sector pay freeze has already been announced. Public sector pay, in fact, has been frozen for public sector workers over the past 10 years, resulting in a pay cut in real terms of a staggering 19%. However, if the vaccines do prove to be effective, it may alleviate the crisis to a certain extent and create a bit of a rebound, but any appearance of a recovery will be short-lived and will not stop the collapse in the economy in the UK or internationally. So 2020-21 marks a significant turning point in history and the start of a new era of intensified capitalist crisis. So the events of last year, starting with the election of Johnson's government and the mood that we're all in this together, have begun to melt away like the snow that some of us have seen over the past few days, melted away as a result of the failures of the Johnson government as compared with the rest of the world. We've seen U-turns, cronyism, that is giving contracts to their mates, and that's led to their popularity sliding. And yet Labour under Starmer have defended capitalism rather than leading the fight against mass unemployment, student rents and fees for 9,000, for no education, breaches of health and safety, attacks on unions and their trade union reps. There have been sporadic beginnings of a fight back with the gas workers, seafarers at Whitelink ferries, care workers. But what is clear is that we need an independent working class voice to lead the fight against mass unemployment, which will probably jump to about 6% in the next few months, when many firms, especially in the retail and consumer services sector, will not ask all their furloughed staff to return to work. So what does that mean to those of us living in Kent, the Garden of England? As the COVID crisis continues, its economic impact on the working class communities is being felt hard across our county of Kent. Families have been hit by pay cuts, and unemployment and food bank demand has rocketed. Child poverty in the Folkestone and Hythe district wards has risen for the 5th year in a row, with the number of children aged under 16 living in relative or absolute poverty now well above 3,000 children. The number of people claiming universal credit at Kent job centres reached 157,304 in Kent. That is equivalent to 101,000 households in Kent claiming universal credit, or 15% of all Kent households. COVID-19 is not just taking lives, it's destroying the lives of the living as well, meaning that nearly 13.11% of the working population aged between 16 and 64 are now unemployed in the county. This crisis has exposed the impact of a decade of austerity on the NHS and through cuts to public services, especially local council cuts. The General and Municipal Union in 2019, before the crisis hit, said that the overall scale of financial challenge facing local government is difficult to overstate. The Local Government Association estimates that councils face an overall funding gap of £3.1 billion in 2019-20, which will rise to an estimated £8 billion by 2024-25 without urgent action. The representatives of the capitalist class will try to cover over the failure of their system, capitalism, through using the pandemic as an excuse. But Peter Oakford, Kent County Council's Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Finance, when introducing the discussion on setting the budget in Kent, said, "Since 2010, we have made savings in excess of £710 million as we responded to cuts in government funding, coupled with an increased demand for some of our services. But this is the biggest financial challenge we have faced in that time. The future is uncertain, and even though we will not know how much funding we will receive from the government, we might have to make plans now to balance next year's budget. We have to consider making some difficult decisions about where to reduce our spending. This is shorthand for we will cut jobs, services and homes as soon as we are able." So what is the Labour Party's response to these cuts? In June 2020, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, warned that he will be left with no choice other than to make significant cuts unless the government urgently acts to support local and regional authorities. He said that the cuts would hit the police, London Fire Brigade, Transport for London and Greater London Authority, and would undermine the government's pledge to recruit 20,000 new police officers. It would also impact on efforts to transform the London Fire Brigade in the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire. And that follows on from the decision by Corbyn and MacDonald in 2015, following calls for councils to draw up budgets based on people's needs, as was done in Liverpool when under a socialist-led council we built homes, service centres and developed services and children's centres. But Corbyn and MacDonald decided that Labour Party would not follow the same route in the run-up to the council elections. And unfortunately, while some Labour councillors in Kent have said they will oppose cuts in frontline services, they have hesitated to oppose all cuts. We say take the Liverpool road, oppose all cuts and implement a needs budget and force the government to pay up. This year, the crisis is set to deepen in Kent, and it's essential that we provide a clear anti-cuts socialist alternative to the failings of both the Tory government and also the new right-wing Starmer-led Labour Party. We say that they should oppose all cuts and provide a socialist programme for jobs, pay and public services. It's also important that we counter the attempts of the racists and the far right to exploit the issue of asylum seekers and raise our demand of a fight for jobs, homes and services, not racism, and defend the right to asylum. However, the other day the government revealed tragic plans to end the Dubs agreement to take unaccompanied child asylum seekers, and that is undoubtedly due to pressure from local councils such as Kent County Council, who had responsibility for the initial care of a few hundred unaccompanied child asylum seekers arriving in the UK. We're confident that workers' struggles will continue to develop, as we have seen through the action by school-based workers at the start of the year, and now workers at British Gas on strike against fire and rehire attacks on pay and conditions, and on aircrew. We believe that that includes campaigning for a new mass workers' party that will offer an alternative to capitalist crisis through which we can argue our socialist ideas. We say it's time to build an independent working class opposition, and that is why we welcome the relaunch of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition established by the RMT Transport Union in 2010. We believe that the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition is the beginning of that struggle, so join us in that struggle to end poverty, homelessness and hunger. Join us in the fight for a socialist future.